Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. My name is Juan Londoño, for those of you that don't know me, and today's topic is the importance of a photographer. Now it's not the importance of a photographer the way you're thinking probably, where I'm going to talk about, how I can, as a photographer, I can make or break a picture or dealing with clients or blah, blah, blah. It has nothing to do with that. We're going to discuss two quotes by famous photographers, and we're going to analyze and kind of play around in our head with their ideas and their concepts, maybe what they were trying to say back then in those film days, and how they kind of pertain to the digital world today. And we'll see if one of those quotes makes more sense than the other. Maybe they both make sense, maybe neither makes sense. Either way, it's a Photo Philosophy Friday topic. Let's play with it, let's have fun with it. That's the whole purpose of this. Let's explore. We're going to begin with two famous quotes by photographers. The first quote is by Edward Steichen. Now, I don't know if it's Steichen or Steichen. I apologize if I'm butchering that name. I'm going to go with Steichen because I don't really know. But the quote reads as follows. "A portrait is not made in the camera, but on either side of it." Think about that for a second. Now let's move on to the second quote. The second quote is by Ansel Adams, and it reads as follows. "There are always two people in every picture, the photographer and the viewer." People that study photography often talk about these topics, right? What are the most important characteristics of a photograph? Is it the subject? Is it the photographer? Is it the camera? Is it the viewer? There are so many things we can talk about, but this specific video is going to talk about these two quotes and how they vary from each other, and how that kind of forces us to see the whole process of picture taking. Let me repeat those one more time real quick, okay? So Edward Steichen, and by the way, I didn't mention the second quote. I don't know if I did. It's Ansel Adams. But the first quote again, Edward Steichen, or Steichen, I said I was going to go with that one. "A portrait is not made in the camera, but on either side of it." So think about it. There's no mention of a camera unless it's being used to divide two sides, right? You're talking about, in this case, you're talking about the photographer and you're talking about the subject, all right? Now let's go to the second quote. In the second quote by Ansel Adams, and I love both of these quotes, by the way. This quote says, "There are always two people in every picture, the photographer and the viewer." So again, no mention of a camera. But both of those quotes mention one thing. One mentions a subject, the other mentions a viewer, but both mention the photographer. It's funny how, unconsciously, or I should say subconsciously, both of these famous, very famous photographers of their time said two different things, but they kind of both said the same thing. They kind of both emphasized the importance of the photographer. And like we just mentioned, there's really no mention of a camera, right? So I can see camera companies like Canon and Sony and Nikon, or Nikon as many people call it, and others, cringing right now, rolling in their seats, fidgeting uncomfortably when we mention that the camera is not important. We've talked about this in our videos before. What is the importance of a camera? Well, obviously, none of this topic would be non-existent if the camera didn't exist, right? And photography companies like Canon and Nikon dump millions of dollars each year into research for better lenses, for faster cameras, for higher ISO, right? You think about it, and they just focusing, tracking faster, you name it, there's tons of money dumped into this. So we have to give them credit, right? We have amazing cameras in our hands that allow us to do all this. But the same topic that we've talked about before still holds. You talk about photographers from the 40s, 50s, right? Talk about Ansel Adams and Edward Steichen. And they created masterpieces with less fancy equipment than we have today. Let's face it, those film cameras were crappy. Now, when I say crappy, I don't mean crappy in those days. In those days, they were phenomenal cameras. They were crappy by our standards today. You look at a digital camera today, and if you look at the megapixels and how much sharper it is and what you can do with it and the thousands of freaking features that they give us, you know, there's no excuse at all why we shouldn't be creating really good pictures. So we've accepted at this point that the camera is important. I don't want to leave that out. The camera is important. None of this is possible without it. But the camera is a piece of electronics that's the same in everybody's hand. Take, for example, you know, the Canon R5. You hold the Canon R5 in your hand, I hold the Canon R5 in my hand, and we go and do a photo shoot, right, in the wilderness, and we do some landscapes. We're going to come back with different ideas. You can be dropped off in one spot, and I can be dropped off at that same exact spot one day later, assuming the weather's exactly the same. You're going to be drawn to different subjects, right, different objects in this wilderness, right, in this wherever they dropped us off. And I'm going to be drawn to different things. Not only will we be drawn to different things, even if we're drawn to the same subject, we're going to compose it differently. We're going to set our camera differently, right? So the camera is important, but the camera is like a robot. It doesn't have any personality and it doesn't make any decisions. We are going to do all of that. That's why I think the importance of the photographer is emphasized in both of these quotes. And right now is water break time. You know that I always push you guys to drink your water and stay healthy. So please pause the video, go get yourself some water if you don't have it already. This is a great time to take a water break. So let's look at Edward Steichen, or Steichen's comment again, right? That the portrait is made on either side of the camera, not in the camera itself. So obviously he's giving a lot of credit to the photographer and to the subject. And by the way, the subject doesn't have to be human, right? Landscape, puppies, you know, flowers, whatever. It's very true that you can't have a portrait without both of these. You need a photographer. You know, until the days that artificial intelligence takes over the world, you're going to need a photographer and you're going to need a subject. And again, the emphasis that the camera is not the important thing here because it doesn't think. It doesn't, you know, it's an apparatus, it's a tool, it's a hammer. And we do things with this hammer. We build, right? We build, whether it's a screwdriver, a hammer, we can build, you know, a cabinet or a table or a building, whatever it is, right? We're the creators, the photographer is the creator, and we need a subject, right? In the case of a building, we need wood, we need supplies. But this hammer, you know, it's going to help us. And a fancy hammer may make it easy. But at the same time, it's whatever we choose to do with that hammer. Now, because of this whole thing about the camera being less important than the photographer and the subject, I'm thinking that maybe if I were to write the comment, this quote now, of course it's easier, you know, hindsight is 20/20, right? It's easy to look back and correct people, but you know, I'm certainly not blaming anybody for writing the quote that they wrote. I think it's a fantastic quote. But I think if I were to write it now, knowing what I know, I would say that maybe, and this is what I would do, a unique portrait is made on either side of the camera, right? Because, you know, it doesn't suffice to say that a portrait is made on either side of the camera. By saying that a portrait is made on either side of the camera, you're still including the camera. First of all, you're saying the word camera in the quote, but you're also including the camera because the camera's taking the picture. I think Edward Steichen, you know, wrote the best quote with what he had in the times he was living. But looking at it more carefully now, I would make the quote say something like a unique portrait is made on either side of the camera, not in the camera itself. Because by adding the word unique, now you can take the camera out of the equation, right? And you're still saying the word camera, but by saying a unique portrait, now you're involving the photographer completely. Because a portrait, you can set up a camera, you know, there are cameras everywhere, right? And you can set them up to shoot when they see an eye or a face or a movement. So a portrait, you know, doesn't really need a photographer in those cases. But when you say a unique portrait, now you're involving a photographer with ideas, with composition, with settings, with skills. So I think that's the only change I would make to that quote. If, you know, if it was okay to make it. I'm not even going there because the quote is what it is, right? But just looking back, that's what I would do to that quote, you know, knowing what I know today. Ansel Adams, on the other hand, is saying there are two people in every portrait. And one is the photographer and one is the viewer. And he actually said there are two people in every picture. So, obviously he's referring to portraits of people, right? We don't have to go there, because if I'm out shooting landscapes, then there aren't two people in every picture. It's just me, the photographer, right? Or you, the photographer. So sticking to the fact that we're talking about portraits, here's a good question. Would we even take a picture if we knew there was nobody to view it? That reminds me a little of the quote, if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one to hear it, did it actually make a sound? That's a philosophical question, right? Which kind of fits in with this theme today. Photo Philosophy Friday. People say, well, yeah, it made a sound. Just because we didn't hear it doesn't mean it didn't make a sound. But the definition of making a sound is that somebody heard it. If nobody heard it, then it didn't really make a sound, right? Because it didn't hit ears that defined it as a sound. So if we were out taking pictures and we knew that if we were going to go out to take pictures and we knew that there was nobody to ever view these, would we actually take them? I believe people would still take pictures, even if they knew nobody was going to view them. I think many photographers I know anyway, including myself, we shoot for fun, for pleasure, right? So especially today in the digital realm, in the film world, would you go out shooting something if you were never, ever, ever going to look at it yourself? Probably not. In which case, that comment holds true that there's always going to be a viewer, right? And if it's a portrait of another person, there'll be a subject as well, right? There's two people in every picture. But today, with digital cameras, I can snap a picture. I can go out just to clear my mind and go to like a botanical garden or, a hill or a mountain somewhere. And I can snap a picture, look down at my camera, look quick as it gives me that 2-second preview, and just be completely content with what I'm looking at. And I may decide to not, put my pictures in the computer and never look at them again. Maybe I'll put them in the computer and I won't look at them for years, maybe never again, right? That can actually happen. I think it does happen a lot today. People go out just to clear their mind. They'll take a bunch of pictures, they'll put them in their computer, and they don't have time to process them or look at them again because there's another photo shoot coming. The one that's coming up might be for money, work. And then there's another pleasure photo shoot later on that they go, and this can actually happen. In the film days, you at least had to look at the negative if you didn't want to print the picture, right? Just to see if the picture came out. Otherwise, the sake of going into the woods and shooting with film and never looking at anything, that's probably no different than just holding up a box and just pushing a fake button and pretending you're taking a picture. It's the same thing, right? Which is why Ansel Adams would make a comment like this or quote like this. But today, I don't think it applies anymore. So we can probably agree here that the digital world, the digital era that we live in, has certainly changed this for photographers. We can actually go take pictures and never look at them again. We're done. So would you agree that maybe Ansel Adams' quote was more relevant in the film days than it is today? Now there's one more point to be made about Ansel Adams' quote. Is it possible that the photographer and the viewer are the same person? What if I'm the type of photographer that does not like sharing my pictures? For whatever reason. I know people like this. And some of them are famous, and some of them are people I watch on YouTube, and they admit that they don't like sharing their pictures with other people. In that case, you're either going to print them out or you're going to keep them on your computer, but you will be the viewer. The photographer will be the viewer. Same person. So in this case, even in the film days, we might say that Ansel Adams' quote might not always apply, because he's saying that the photographer and the viewer are the two people that will always exist in a picture, but if the photographer is the viewer, then we're talking about one person. Let's remember and let's keep in mind that this is a Photo Philosophy Friday theme, right? So our thoughts have a lot of flexibility here. Basically, we're allowed to think whatever we want. But you got to remember, so were Edward Steichen and Ansel Adams. They also had liberty to think whatever they want and to say whatever they want. And, somebody must have quoted them. I don't know if they wrote it somewhere or they said it in an interview and somebody quoted them. It doesn't matter. They're entitled to their thoughts, their beliefs, right? And so are we. My personal preference between these two quotes is kind of to lean towards Edward Steichen's quote. A portrait is not made in the camera, but rather on either side of it. If you look at Ansel Adams' quote about there's two people in every picture, well, we've already talked about that, right? Assuming it is a portrait, yes, there are two people, but actually, no, it has nothing to do with it. It's the photographer and the viewer. So if the photographer is the viewer, right, somebody who doesn't want to share their stuff, then there's really only one person in every picture. So I tend to lean towards Edward Steichen's comment here. And it's not about one or the other. I'm curious about your thoughts, what you are leaning towards, kind of what you favor. Or are you leaning more towards Ansel Adams' quote? Or is there another quote, a similar quote, that you kind of know that you'd like to share, that you're more kind of in touch with? Let me know in the comments. But at this point, we've reached our conclusion. So let me know what you think in general. Go down to the comments and just let me know if you agree or disagree with any of this. If you enjoyed this little session, please like down here with the little thumbs up. And if you are not subscribed already, please subscribe down here on this side. Don't forget to click on the little notification bell so you get notified every time that there's a new video. I hope you did enjoy this Photo Philosophy Friday topic. And until the next time, from the bottom of my heart, love you guys. Ciao for now.